Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is our pleasure to welcome you all this evening to this panel discussion to mark the 17th Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. I take this opportunity to welcome our distinguished speakers on the dais. I also extend a warm welcome to the heads of missions in Delhi, representatives of the diplomatic corps, scholars and academics who have graciously accepted our invitation to join us today. The program for the evening is as follows. We'll begin with the welcome remarks by Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, Director General, Indian Council of World Affairs. Thereafter, the special address would be delivered by Dr. Asaf Saeed, Secretary CPV and OIA, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. This would be followed by the panel discussion on the theme of celebrating diaspora in the era of Amrit Kaal. May I now request Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, Director General, Indian Council of World Affairs, to kindly make her welcome remarks.
Good afternoon and a very, very warm welcome to Sapru House. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Asaf Saeed, Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, for agreeing to join today's panel discussion. I would also like to thank the panelists, Ambassador Virendra Gupta, Ambassador Anit Raghunayat, Professor Vinod Kadaria, and Mr. Sushil Pandit. I also welcome the ambassadors who have joined us today, the CDAs who have joined us today, and members of the diplomatic community. I recognize in the crowd my one of my former colleagues, Ambassador, who is also here with us, and I thank the ambassadors who have joined us today. With the 17th Pravasi Bharatiya Divas just a few days away from now, we are privileged to join hands with the Ministry of External Affairs to organize this curtain raiser event at Sapru House on the theme Celebrating the Diaspora in an Era of Amrit Kaal. Pravasi Bharatiya Divas is being held this time in Indore from 8 to 10 January, and we see Pravasi Bharatiya Divas as an important and a unique platform for re-engaging and reconnecting with overseas Indians. It is a bridge that connects people who trace their descent to India, and a bridge that connects them to their motherland and to their roots. It celebrates the success of overseas Indian communities, and most importantly, Pravasi Bharatiya Divas is an opportunity for people of Indian origin from different parts of the world to interact with each other and share their experiences and explore possibilities of working together in India as India enters its Amrit Kaal. It is a journey of the next 25 years till 2047, when India will celebrate 100 years of its freedom from colonial rule. Historically speaking, Pravasi Bharatiya Divas is the return of Mahatma Gandhi to India from South Africa on 9th January 1915. Mahatma Gandhi, the greatest Pravasi who led India's freedom struggle and got our nation its freedom. Indian diaspora is one of the oldest and indeed one of the largest diasporas in the world, with approximately a strength of 32 million. Today, Indians are found in all continents and in almost every country in the world. The diaspora community has excelled in terms of acquiring knowledge, skills, and expertise in many diverse fields and in building networks of excellence. This can be found from their contribution and achievements in fields ranging from science and technology, education and research, finance and business, to pharmaceuticals and healthcare engineering, among others. Indian origin individuals are occupants of the highest offices in other countries today, in Guyana, Suriname, UK, Ireland, Portugal, and Mauritius. Indian origin CEOs are leading industries across the world. Much to be proud of, indeed. India's approach to the diaspora is characterized by 3 C's: care, connect, celebrate, and contribute. The 4C approach is a comprehensive framework that is designed to take care of the welfare and protection of our diaspora, connect them to their roots, celebrate their achievements, and applaud their contributions to India's development. The theme of the 17th Pravasi Bharatiya Divas is Diaspora, reliable partners in India's progress towards Amrit Kaal. The forthcoming PVD will build upon the discussions at the previous PVD held virtually in 2021, where the theme was Contributing to Atmanirbhar Bharat. We look forward to the talent and skills of the diaspora community to contribute to India's growth story. This PVD holds special relevance as it coincides with India's G20 and SCO presidency. I am sure that the diaspora participating in PBD will witness the confidence and energy with which India is taking its role of being chair of these two very important organizations. In conclusion, finally, ICWA is privileged to hold this panel discussion among representatives of government, diaspora organization, and academic community. I thank you all for your presence once again. Welcome, and we look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. May I now invite Dr. Asif Saeed, Secretary, CPV and OIA, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, to deliver his special address.
Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, DG ICWA, Ambassador Virendra Gupta, Ambassador Anil Tirugunayat, Professor Binod Khadria, Sri Sushil Pandit, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you and a warm welcome to this curtain raiser. At the outset, let me take this opportunity to thank the Indian Council of World Affairs for organizing this curtain raiser for the 17th Pravasi Bharatiya Divas to be held in Indore coming week, 8th to 10th of January. And I presume that this is the first event of ICWA this year, and also I believe that it is also the first event of the Center for Migration, Mobility and Diaspora Studies, which was created recently as a vertical under ICWA by merging the erstwhile India Center for Migration, ICM. Since its inception in 2003, the PBD has grown into a very important forum for connecting with the diaspora, our Indian community, which is spread in different parts of the world, and especially this PBD is being held at a time when India has already celebrated 75 years, the Akam celebrations we have done, and also as we entered the Amrit Kaal, the next 25 years, leading to India at 2047, which is very important, and we feel that our efforts at this point of time, along with the diaspora, will dictate the transformation that the country would go through in terms of growth and prosperity. In this effort, towards the development of our country, we look forward to the contribution of diaspora, and we look forward to diaspora as a very important asset for our country. As many of you are aware, the Indian diaspora is perhaps the world's largest and oldest diaspora, and as was mentioned, the numbers are roughly in the range of 32 million, comprising of about 18.68 million persons of Indian origin, essentially those who have India connection but have acquired foreign nationality, and 13.45 million non-resident Indians, those holding the Indian passports, and of these 13.45, around 8.75 million are living and working in the Gulf countries. So the Indian diaspora is very well spread, almost across 210 countries, from Caribbean islands to Southeast Asia, Africa, North America and Europe. In Seychelles, where I was once posted, the Indians are one of the first settlers in that country. So with the passage of time, the diaspora has emerged as a very dynamic and powerful entity, recognized globally for their skill, hard work, law-abiding nature, tenacity, and also, for their contribution in different fields, and also a very important constituent. The diaspora is an important constituent for India's soft power and immensely contributing, to promoting Indian traditional knowledge and heritage and cultural ethos worldwide, wherever they are. Also, as was mentioned by the DG, that Indian diaspora is also gaining political influence worldwide, and many parliamentarians, including the heads of states of several countries, owe their origin to India. In some countries, the Indian diaspora is even 6th generation, 7th generation, which is there like in Malaysia. An estimated 140 sitting members of parliament and mayors are there in over 20 countries belonging to the Indian origin. There are at least 7 countries which have presidents or prime ministers of Indian ancestry. For example, UK, Ireland, Portugal, Mauritius, Guyana, Suriname, and Seychelles. So this fits in well with India's growing prominence in the global affairs and could also be the key in advancing India's ties with these countries and as well as with other countries wherever diaspora is there. So it is the diaspora, we believe, it is instrumental in propelling our country's growth. This has been done in various ways. One, in promoting trade and investments, in technology transfer, the remittances, for instance, and the social capital, strategic support, cultural diplomacy, education. So many things, are there in which the diaspora has been playing a direct or an indirect role. Just to give you an example of remittances alone, even during the peak of pandemic, when we talk about financial year 2021, in India was the World Bank has described India as the highest recipient of remittances, with about US $87 billion coming in that financial year, indicating the resilience of not only the monetary flows but also the Indian origin people. And in most places where the diaspora settle, in terms of the immigrant groups, the Indian immigrant groups are relatively well settled and more financially and educationally sound. So of these remittances, another significant thing which has come up is that the working class alone contributed to about 54.42 billion of the total remittances. This again goes to the importance of the working class within the diaspora. So, our diaspora is both, as I mentioned, low-skill occupations as well as, with those with high intellectual capital and leadership capabilities, and together, they are contributing in a meaningful manner. We regard the diaspora as a living bridge, which is strengthening its bond between our country and the countries where they are living. So it's a very important element of our foreign policy. You would have also noticed that wherever the top leaders from India, whether it is the Prime Minister or it is the External Affairs Ministers or other ministers go abroad to visit any country, they make it a point that there is invariably a diaspora engagement, so that there is a learning process. It's a two-way communication. Again, it was mentioned that we engage the diaspora in terms of 4 C's, which was care, connect, celebrate, and contribute. So coming to one of the 4 C's, which is the celebrate. This brings me to the topic at hand today is the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, the forthcoming one, which is being held every 2 years since 2017, when it was decided that it will be done every alternate year. And then again, another important element of the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas is the conferment of the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman Awards, which is the highest awards which are given to the diaspora communities. So it is in fact not only just a celebration of our ties with the overseas Indians, but a manifestation of our will to remain connected with the diaspora, because I feel that the PBD is an event which is perhaps the unique event, one of its kind anywhere where the countries are engaging so closely with the diaspora, and also it is universally acknowledged in different international forums that India has been very uniquely attached to the diaspora, using various ways, technology and old heritage and many other things. So this is an opportunity for the diaspora as well as for the various stakeholders in government to engage with each other, learn from various processes which have been in place, for the deliverance of services, to engage with the diaspora. Over the period last 1 decade or so, many things which you see, the OCI cards, the e-migrate, the e-sanad, the Madad portal, many things which have been implemented are also a result of these kinds of discussions and the suggestions which have come about in these kinds of discussions with the diaspora. So the coming diaspora, the 17th Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, which is going to be organized with Madhya Pradesh as the partner state in Indore. Indore, as you know, is regarded as the cleanest city in India for the 6 successive years. So it's going to be a good experience for those who are coming from different parts of the world. And this will also be the first PBD convention in the post-pandemic period, the first physical format after a gap of 4 years. And this will also be the first convention in the Amrit Kaal. So it has a lot of significance which is there. And we believe that our as our nation marches towards the goal of making India as a developed nation by 2047, our diaspora will play a very important role in the national development agenda. That's why the theme of this PBD is very aptly chosen, that is the Diaspora Reliable Partners for India's Progress in Amrit Kaal. So we intend to deliberate upon new ways to encourage further participation of the diaspora that will provide added momentum to India's growth story, especially in view of emerging changes happening globally, and again in view of the technological innovations which are happening, widespread use of artificial intelligence, working from home becoming a norm, gender mainstreaming becoming again an important dimension, transition to renewable energy and climate change concerns and how it is impacting the global migration and mobility, and all the demographic shifts that are taking place, which also brings us to our own demographic dividend, which we believe India has an advantage. All these are important factors, which decide, the engagement of the diaspora and the mainstreaming of our national development. In this PBD, we have also, having 5 key plenary sessions on the themes of youth, healthcare, soft power, Indian workforce and women. 4 of these sessions would be headed by cabinet ministers, and the panelists are also drawn from different walks of life. This is also perhaps the first time that each of the panels are headed by a cabinet minister. And not only cabinet ministers from India, many sessions are also, the participants are the ministers from other countries. We have ministerial delegations from Malaysia, Mauritius, Panama, and besides, of course, you may have read that 2 heads of states are coming, the Mr. Chandra Prasad Santokhi, the President of the Republic of Suriname, and then the Dr. Muhammad Irfan Ali, the President of Cooperative Republic of Guyana, who is the chief guest. And besides, we also have for the youth PBD, it's an important element. We begin with the youth PBD. We have Ms. Zenita Mascarenas, Member of Parliament from Australia, who is there. So like that, we have several, key ministers who are participating in these key sessions. And as was also mentioned, since India has started, has assumed the G20 presidency and started having meetings of G20 throughout the country. In fact, we are going to have more than 200 meetings in almost 56, 57 different cities across India. So there would also be a branding of G20 and the details of the G20 presidency. We have invited the G20 Sherpa and the G20 coordinator to also make a presentation about this. There will also be showcasing of Madhya Pradesh as a state. Madhya Pradesh state would also be making presentations on several sectors like textiles, garments, IT, IT-enabled services, healthcare, pharma, and so on and so forth. And the PBD would also be followed by the Global Investment Summit in Madhya Pradesh. So it's all going to be a very engaging, week, the coming week. We have received overwhelming response from the diaspora, including the youth, as I mentioned. So far, as we speak, we have received 3,500 registrations from 66 different countries. We run a program called the Know India program, particularly focusing on the diaspora youth below the age of 35. So we have 2 batches, the 63rd and 64th batch of the Know India program. So 80 participants, young people from different countries would be joining the PBD celebrations. So far under this program, we have covered about 2,200 youth from different parts of the world. So going forward, in our engagement with the diaspora, can we look upon the diaspora in helping us realize some of our goals and aspirations for India at 2047? For instance, can we imagine an Indian company in the list of top 10 or 20 consulting firms in the world? Or can India emerge as a preferred center for international commercial arbitration? Should we have an international Indian news channel with a global footprint like that of BBC or CNN? Can we also think of positioning India's higher educational institutions and centers of learning as international facilities for training civil servants in development and governance solutions? While the Government of India is engaged in identifying new mobility pathways and newer job opportunities for our nationals in different parts of the world and easing of immigration rules and laws, can we also look upon diaspora helping us in the mapping of global demand for jobs and skills so that India at 2047 could project itself as the skill capital of the world, fulfilling the needs of every country in every possible field? I am confident that today's discussions by the panelists will cover these areas and throw valuable insights towards this dynamic relationship between India, Government of India and officials and the Indian diaspora, so that looking forward we can make use of these platforms like the PBD for further development of our country. As I said, we are in a very important phase of next 25 years leading up to 2047. I'll be very happy to chair this panel discussion and looking forward to very engaging views of the panelists and of course the question and answer sessions that will follow. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for your comprehensive remarks. May I now request you to chair the panel discussion for the day?
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very distinguished panel of speakers, and two of them former ambassadors, having served in very important countries and engaging in important role in the current portfolios. So I would like to request the panelists. I'll invite each one of them to share their views. So we could perhaps each panelist can share about 5 to 6 minutes on the topic of today's discussion of how do we engage with the diaspora, how do we celebrate the diaspora. As I mentioned, as India is moving in a very crucial phase of moving from Akam to Amrit Kaal. So to set the tone for today's discussion, I would like to first invite Ambassador Virendra Gupta, who is the president of Antarrashtriya Sahyog Parishad, a very important organization dealing with the diaspora, to share his views. Sir.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Asif Saeed, the chair of the panel discussion, Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, my fellow panelists, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and I'd particularly like to welcome the young people. I see so many students and young people in the audience. Welcome to all of you. I think you all know the broad composition of the Indian diaspora. There are essentially three particular sections of the diaspora. And the reason why I bring it to you is that sometimes some of our commentators tend to create hierarchies. Broadly, there is diaspora in the Bharatiya countries, people who went as indentured labor in almost semi-slavery conditions. Then there are people who are working in the Gulf. And incidentally, most of the remittances which come to our country come from the Gulf countries by our workers. And then, of course, you have the dollar diaspora, the diaspora which is in America and other Western countries. I think each of this diasporic section is extremely important, and they have their own unique characteristics and unique strengths. So I think we must get away from the temptation to set out any priorities. Our engagement with diaspora has undergone almost a complete transformation in the last 25 years. Prior to that, Government of India was at best indifferent. people of India felt a sense of betrayal vis-a-vis the diaspora, because they thought that those people had left India and moved away from the service to our motherland for improving their own personal lives. That was the broad sense. The people who went out on their part, they were extremely diffident in associating with a country which was weak and which didn't count for very much in the international affairs. So they felt a sense of embarrassment. So their connection with India was very diffident, and certainly there was no exhibitionism in that. And that applied to people across the spectrum in the diaspora. I remember that a story that I heard in Trinidad, that Indian children who were given tiffin comprising of Indian food, they would not open their tiffins in front of the other children. That they would go to the bathrooms and eat their tiffin in quiet solitude. And then when I was in Trinidad, I found the situation completely transformed. People were not only proud of the Indian cuisine, Indian food, not only that they would eat Indian food with great degree of pride, but they would also offer it to their guests, unlike what they would do in the previous times, that to the others they would like to offer non-Indian food to make them feel comfortable. So I think this growing assertiveness with regard to expression of their cultural identity, and which you see manifest in very long celebration in the Caribbean, where there is large people of Indian origin, large number of people of Indian origin. The Diwali celebration goes on for almost a month. All Indian festivals are celebrated with particular enthusiasm. In America and other countries where there are large Indians, festivals are not only celebrated, people come out in the Indian attire. So I think in every which way, they are very proud of their Indian identity. So I think in 2003, because the time is very short, in 2003, Government of India, for the first time, took a very path-breaking step and instituted this Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. Now, why did this happen? Because there was also growing maturity all around. Prior to that, governments were sensitive about a person of Indian origin who had taken citizenship. There was always a matter of suspicion. But in these last 25 years, there was growing maturity with regard to multiple identity for individuals. Many countries, even in fact, had begun to grant dual citizenship. So I think it was accepted that a person living in America, person of Indian origin, who had taken American citizenship, he was very loyal and committed politically to America, but he could have a separate cultural identity. He could have a distinct cultural identity. He could have emotional attachment with India, which was the country of his origin, and that there was no contradiction between his cultural and emotional attachment with India and his political commitment and attachment to the country that he had adopted. Prime Minister Modi's the diaspora to an altogether new level. His active and very high-profile meetings with PIO communities, and the reason why I'm mentioning it is that you didn't see that happen earlier. So I think it was a very distinct change. It created a sense of empowerment amongst the Indian diaspora communities. It also highlighted the kind of importance India was prepared to attach to engaging diaspora and regarding diaspora as a central theme in their foreign policy. Now, one of the tangible results of that has been that there is growing interest in diaspora within our own country. And I want to mention that only recently we completed a capsule for 30 hours at the Khalsa College, Delhi University, and there is growing interest amongst, and I think in the next several months, we would be able to do similar capsules in some other Delhi University and other universities, colleges. I think that is happening because people have suddenly begun to look at the diaspora and the kind of role that the diaspora is playing. Now, very briefly, what are our expectations from the diaspora? Very often, we begin to ask this question, say, we are doing so much for diaspora, we are engaging diaspora, we are acknowledging them, we are organizing these conventions. Now, what is the diaspora doing for us? I think, in my opinion, this is a very unfair question. Because diaspora is like our children. And mother should never ask of her children as to what those children can do for. And this is not just a rhetorical pointer. But I think we have to understand that there can be benefits which could be coming to us. In any case, questions have been raised about technology transfer. Remittances are already coming from workers in the Gulf countries, not so much from our very rich and influential expatriates in developed countries. Investments, our expectations, there are expectations. Some bit of investment has come from different parts of the world by our diaspora communities, but not a very significant number. Technology transfer has also not happened in very significant quantities because technology transfer doesn't happen for love or emotional attachment. Technology transfer happens because of commercial considerations. I think the important point to note is that we have the presence of Indian CEOs in very many large organizations, and they can influence the working of their organizations in setting up facilities in India. There are certain facilities which have to be set up in developing countries because of economic considerations, and I think many of these facilities can come to India because we can provide the requisite facilities. Political advocacy, that's become very important because Indian communities overseas have grown in confidence. They have felt a sense of empowerment. They have felt a sense of involvement by the doings of our government. So I think we can reasonably expect that they will be undertaking advocacy on behalf of us, and I think which is happening, and we attach a great degree of value to it. Soft power projection is another very, very important factor. I think the role of diaspora has to be recognized in promoting our soft power. We have a few cultural greater and more easier access at concessional fee structure. I think this will go a long way. We should look at the experience of other countries, particularly Israel, which has not a very large diaspora, but very important and very influential diaspora. China, which is also, I think, probably larger diaspora than ours, and what the Chinese have been doing. So I think we need to study that with a view to improving our outreach with the diaspora. Finally, as India is growing in its stature and power, and as our economy is growing, there is greater degree of confidence all around. Now the question rightfully arises is that if there is a problem in the diaspora country, let's say, for example, a country X far away from us, and some tectonic event, political event takes place, and the Indian diaspora community is disenfranchised. What can we do? I think we have to carefully assess what our potential is, what our capacity is. Sometimes there is a jingoistic narrative going around in this country, and that frightens me because we have to assess our capabilities, we have to understand our capacities and act according to that, because overreach can have disastrous consequences. With these few words, I'd like to thank ICWA for organizing this event and for having made me a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Virendra Gupta. You have really brought out several pertinent points relating to that diaspora. Particularly, you mentioned that there is a growing assertiveness among the diaspora in expressing their cultural identity, Indian identity. You have also vouched for greater financial support and educational scholarships. To this, I may mention that the Know India program, we have actually from this year decided to double the number from 250 per year. This year onwards, it will be 500 per year. And also the scholarship program for diaspora children, which was earlier only restricted to 40 countries, has now been, the scheme has been expanded to cover diaspora from all countries across the world. So there are these programs which are taking place. Also, there is a unique program which we are working on, which is called the Pravasi Tirth Darshan Yojana, which is basically an initiative. First, it was started for Bharatiya countries for providing the diaspora an opportunity to visit historical and religious places in India. But this scheme has again now been extended to countries across the world. So with this, we move ahead, and I would like to invite another distinguished ambassador and a dear friend of mine, and Ambassador Anil Turgunayat, who has vast experience, in working in the Middle East and also in Africa. So he has been the former ambassador of India to Jordan, Libya, and Malta, and served in several different countries. And you would always see him writing in various newspapers of repute on foreign policy, on diaspora affairs, and he is a distinguished scholar in several leading think tanks. So I would like to invite him to share his own personal experiences and his own recommendations on the diaspora, particularly in the context of Africa, where I'm taking a quote from his article this morning, where he lamented that perhaps a greater engagement with the diaspora in Africa needs to be done. So over to you, Anil.
Thank you, Ambassador and Chair, Ambassador Saeed, Director General, Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, esteemed panelists. I would not like to repeat on what has already been said, and everything has been said by the three ambassadors before me. Let me try to just say a couple of things. For India today, the diaspora has become a strategic asset. And the 4 C's that everybody talks about is a kind of matrix that is there to bind them. I remember I was in New York in 1993, immediately after our economic reforms that happened. And we still did not have any system whereby we were going to engage the diaspora as much. Although, their former Prime Minister, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, was really involved in this a great deal and tried to give it a big push. So when we were looking for investments into India from USA, we reached out to all the financial companies in the Wall Street. And you'll be surprised that nearly in every major financial institution, there was a person of Indian origin who was at a senior position, either number 2 or number 3 position at that particular time. And every one of them went out of their way to see to it that their companies looked at India with curiosity. That was extremely important for us. So that is the role of the facilitator. Likewise, we talk about today as India being an IT power, an economic power, a knowledge economy. A great deal has been done by those Indians whom we used to treat as some kind of a brain drain who had gone there. And they are the ones who returned to India. And today, many of them we are called as brain trust. So this journey from non-required Indians, non-reliable Indians, and I remember in 80s when I joined service, I read this article in Indian Express where the first title was Non-Reliable Indians. Because the moment something happened in India, they will withdraw their cash immediately because we were dependent a lot on their deposits that were coming in. But today, in India, we are having, World Bank had just said that we will be the largest recipients to $100 billion this year from the remittances by the Indians. That shows also not that India is the only country where they can put their money, but that shows that this is a place they have a greater confidence in it. And for that, I give a great credit to our friends who have often been not treated very well in the Gulf countries, because most of them are blue-collar laborers. And they are the ones who in times to come will have a major problem. The problem is, as we have seen during the pandemic, there have been retrenchments, there have been returns. We had Vande Bharat flights, millions of them, lakhs of them had to be brought back. The thing is that the Gulf countries especially are going through a major churn, which is a technological churn. They are diversifying from their oil and gas wealth towards a different kind of an economy, which requires a great amount of, I would say, the skilling. And so therefore, we'll have to reskill our people whom we are going to send them. In those countries, today, they are there very much. So we'll have to put that kind of an extra effort at home so that they are there. Philippines does it. Somehow, I would, Ambassador, correct me if I'm wrong, India does not have a policy of exporting its labor. Very often our ambassadors also considered it as since they are there, we need to look after them. And eventually when the PVDs became, a lot of things started happening. But there is no proactive involvement in sending people. You rightly mentioned that we'll have to use the PIOs associations. We have to also use our missions to identify opportunities in those countries where the Indians with this kind of expertise could be used. So that is extremely important in my view. Secondly, one point that we need to remember, and that is that all the PIOs or associations or those who become in positions of power may not always be the right conduit to approach as far as access to other Indians are concerned. We have seen what happened, a comment from the British Interior Minister, Foreign Home Secretary at one time, specifically outlining or identifying India in that sense. So that is something that can restrict the mobility for Indians. But I'm happy to note that we have signed some of these agreements, like only this week rather. The Minister has signed with Cyprus, with Austria, with several other countries. UK we have signed recently, and which has been pending for a very long time. So this is an important point to remember. One more thing I would like to say, and you asked about Africa, and I have spent nearly 1/3 of my career in Africa. You see, when I went to my first posting in Ivory Coast, there were just 30 families of Sindhis. And Sindhis not from India, but they came from Pakistan at the time. But they had their own temple, they had everything, and they were very prosperous. But then the one Indian who came, and he was a yoga teacher, and he started this one yoga center in that place. And you'll be surprised that nearly every person, president downwards, came to that yoga center. And that is the kind of soft power, that is the kind of heft that perhaps ambassadors like us look forward to, so that we can have an access and utilize them for advancing our national objectives. So that was something very important. I also remember in Nigeria, my days, there are about that time 30,000, today there are 50,000 Indians. The President Obasanjo, which I quoted today morning also again, used to always mention, and he said that I know India better than you do, so they are the ones who are actually promoting India far more. So what he told me, he said, you know, the Indian industrialists and the businessmen are the second largest employers of the Nigerians after the federal government. That is a statement. So that shows that the Indians are strong in those countries. And as we know now, and I firmly believe, I may be wrong, that from second half of this century, if it cannot become an Asian century, it is very likely to become an Afro-Asian century. And that is the place where the diaspora, even though Mahatma Gandhi came here and we celebrate PBD and all that, but the African diaspora was not that well integrated, not even looked after. They did not even think beyond Mauritius or South Africa whenever the visits took place. It's only under this government that we have seen that they have picked up, there is a formal Africa policy, and we also see that the ministers, Prime Minister and everybody else is traveling to these countries and engaging the diaspora there. I think that 2 million strong diaspora, which is very well off, very influential, very powerful, can be a real bridge when we move into the next part of the century. Since the time is very short, Ambassador, there is only one thing I would like to say, and I will not speak here too much about this, but I'll share that study that I had mentored with some of the people from different parts of India. And this was a survey that they conducted after this. And this survey is very interesting. It says it was their respondents were in the age group of 31 to 50. And 74% of the respondents were male. Participation came from about 21 countries. Now, they said that they were very satisfied with what Indian government did during COVID-19 and other times. But 96% of them stated that they were not aware of any of the schemes launched by the GOI. Now, that is something, a gap, communication gap. I think we can fill it up somehow. They also said that their participation in India's economic growth, majority said that they have invested in India through one or more instruments, that is equity, debt, real estate, FD, etc. And only 12.7% said that they have the business interest in India. So it is an important statistics. Many of them said that they were associated with, 65% actually, were associated with the Indian associations in every country, and you know, in the Gulf we ensure that everybody is registered, whoever is coming with one or the other association. But despite that, if they say that they did not hear about various schemes that we talk about, I think that there is a communication gap. One of the ideas given by that group, it was a group of youngsters who did it, MBAs and all. They said, could we try to have some kind of an app or a website which is called mybharat.gov.in, and all information can be provided on that with regard to the diaspora, with regard to the opportunities. And if we had them, the Indian diaspora helping us in finance, getting all the financial institutions from the West into India, if we could have all the IT heft coming from the West to India, I think in the next 25 years, we need technology to that. And that's what Prime Minister had initiated, and he chaired that summit, virtual summit, Pravasi, and there is a Vajra faculty and all this. And I was surprised myself that there's so many hundreds of them. I mean, we always keep on telling everybody that 25% of scientists in NASA are of Indian origin, or so many CEOs belong to that. But the money goes where it finds its level. So nobody is going to invest just because you are an Indian. They are going to invest because this is an opportunity. And since India is going to become an opportunity, is a big opportunity, going to become the third largest economy, I think that this is the time that they can be a great, I would say, facilitators in providing working technologies while they continue to have their faith and their loyalty to the countries of their adoption. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Anil Turgunayat, for your very illuminating remarks. You highlighted on several key areas, but just to touch upon your emphasis on skilling and reskilling, and your comment that the Indian missions perhaps are reluctant in their support and they are not promoting. In this context, I would like to also mention to you that the current thinking is that the government of India would like to kind of simplify the immigration rules and also modify the role of the immigration officials from those of regulators to facilitators. So, as you know that we have been, you mentioned about the Migration and Mobility Partnership Agreement recently signed with Cyprus and Austria. For those of you who may not be aware, India has started signing MMPAs with many countries, starting with Denmark in 2009. We did with France, UK, Portugal, and then there are countries like Germany, Greece, and Australia, where we are discussing. There are other countries too, which are there. We have basically identified around 30 to 40 countries where we would intend to do that. The whole idea is to identify newer mobility pathways and newer job destinations for our people, because we feel that the traditional markets like GCC are becoming saturated and more competitive. So there is this thing, and of course there are countries in Europe and countries like in Southeast Asia, like Japan and China. They are aging, and we still have a competitive advantage in terms of our demographic dividend. So if we play well in the next 3 decades, I'm sure that we could find newer opportunities. Certainly, Ambassador Turgunayat, what he mentioned about the lack of awareness of the schemes is a problem. I think we really need to introspect and see whether ideas like a newer app dedicated to the Pravasis and the overseas Indians, because I very recently, a few months back, I had gone to my previous posting place, capital Riyadh, and I was addressing the Indian diaspora, and I was mentioning about a few schemes which we conduct, but many of the people do not seem to be fully aware. Even if they were aware, there were gaps in their information. So I think more needs to be done, and also I think. As I mentioned in my remarks in the beginning, that we confer awards, PBSA, Pravasi Bharatiya Samman awards to people. So far we have awarded 266 people, and this year 27. So we don't have a very regular mechanism at the federal government level to engage with all of them. What is done is that the missions engage with the Pravasis, but we have seen that they all belong to different fields, different faculties, many of them from educational field, scientific field. We saw this year that one of the awardees is an exceptional scientist in the semiconductors and other, advanced scientific studies. So I think there is need definitely for a better way of connecting and better way of advertising what it is to be done. So your suggestions will be well taken, and we'll certainly request you for the survey report so that we go into details of this and take corrective measures. So moving ahead in our conversation today on the subject, let me take the pleasure of inviting Professor Binod Kadria, Professor retired from the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor Kadria, I would like to mention that one of our important links in the diaspora is the academics. We have several academicians who are abroad, and this is a very important link because whichever place you go to, people always remember their teachers. And I have seen it in the Middle East. I have seen it in other countries where I was posted. Somebody in our diplomatic community or people who we engage with always remember their Indian professors. So, and then Ambassador Virendra Gupta also mentioned about the renewed interest in the diaspora studies in various universities. So, with these perspectives, may I request you to share your thoughts.
Thank you, Chair Said, Director General Vijay Thakur Singh, and my fellow panelists and my dear friends in the audience. It's a great opportunity to stand here and be counted when we are about to celebrate the Indian diaspora, the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. Well, I am conscious that the time is short and there's a lot to say, but my task has been made easier by the previous insights that we have listened to. There is very little that I can perhaps add to what has already been said. However, let me begin by remembering the year before Mahatma Gandhi came to India. Why was that important? 1914. That was the year of the Komagata Maru. That's the year that Virendra Gupta mentioned about the Indian indentured labor getting the kind of treatments around the world. And that was the Japanese ship that sailed from Calcutta to Vancouver and could not dock because the Canadian government did not allow them to get down, and there were fatalities, and they had to come back to Calcutta. Now there is a memorial in Calcutta about that. We have to remember that. Having said that, I think we have come a long, long way. I'll call it coming full circle. And it has been mentioned, it started in 1977. That was the paradigm shift that began when from non-aligned movement compulsions, we moved on to opening up to the diaspora. The diaspora had great expectations from India when it becomes independent, but there were constraints of the non-aligned movement. As Ambassador has mentioned, that there are two parts, the overseas Indians who have become citizens of other countries, and the other part, the NRIs, non-resident Indians who are still Indian citizens. So there is this question mark before the Indian leaders, the leaders of the Indian movement. Mahatma Gandhi, I would not call him the leader of the independence movement, but the father of the nation. But barring him, when India became independent, then there was these dilemmas, which way to go. And I think what prevailed at that point in time, that if India took up the interest of the diaspora, at that time the diaspora meant only the foreign citizens of Indian origin, then whether that would be an interference in the internal matters of those countries. I think that's where it all began. But in 1977 onwards, India started reevaluating its position, and that's when I think it started shaking hands with the diaspora. And of course, Vajpayee's name has been mentioned. The High-Level Committee on the Indian Diaspora towards the end of the century, 1998. I had the privilege of being a member of the subcommittee of that high-level committee, the Scientific Committee, Science and Technology Committee, and I think that's why the 2003, the report came out, and then 2003 first Diaspora, Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, was celebrated in Delhi, and I happened to be present there. Subsequently, the Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs was established in 2004, and then in 2013 it was merged back with the Ministry of External Affairs. So where do we stand today? I think the 4 C's that have been mentioned, we have talked about celebration, care, and of course connect. Let me talk about contribution, the 4th C. How can, we have heard about the past, we have heard about the trajectories, we have heard about the initiatives that are being taken, but where do we go from here about the future? What future lies ahead and what could be the contributions? I was speaking in way back before the high-level committee was even set up in 1995. I was speaking before a group of Indian diaspora, the Assam Convention, 16th Assam Convention in 1995. Well, that was in Boston. I asked them, what is your coefficient of patriotism? And everybody, stood up and wanted to ask me, what do you mean by coefficient of patriotism? And stylistically, I said, well, let me explain in a very simple term. If you have an option of putting your money, your investment, somewhere in other country, say Brunei, for example, high interest rate, high return, 8% interest you get. In India, you get only 6%. But if you still opt to put it in India, that 2% differential is your coefficient of patriotism. And I think that caught with them. And that's why I think we need to think why the diaspora wants to contribute to India. And they have contributed, starting with Hargobind Khurana, who did not get a clerk's job in Punjab, in Chandigarh. And then he became the Nobel laureate in medicine. And today they have a Khurana auditorium in University of Wisconsin. And I had the privilege of giving a lecture there. So we see from Hargobind Khurana to Kalpana Chawla and to large number of people who have made the difference in making our life better on this planet. I'm not even talking about India. I'm saying about planet. That I think the contribution of the Indian diaspora is innumerable. That I think we need to take into account. But shall we be content with that today? Because today we are living in a globalized world and we need to think about what role can India play. I think it is an opportune moment for another paradigm shift that India happens to be the president of the G20 for 1 year, 2023. We are already here. It has taken over from Indonesia. And then, of course, it has its own position in the Security Council. And that's where I think we need to play that role of being a leader. Now, what is happening in the field of diaspora and international migration? We see Kofi Annan. Kofi Annan had started with the Millennium Development Goal in year 2000, and he wanted to bring diaspora or migration, international migration as a subject on the table. But countries were not willing because it infringed with their idea of sovereignty. And that's when I think Kofi Annan brought it through the back door by piggybacking on the agenda of development. So United Nations development of the development agenda had another component called migration. That became migration and development. That's how we started the Global Forum on Migration and GFMD, migration and development, alternating between a developed and a developing country till 2006, but only very, very late when the Syrian crisis took place, Syrian refugee crisis in 2015, that we found that the Millennium Development Goal was coming to an end and it was Sustainable Development Goal. And all the migration specialists and people interested in that were hoping that it would get its place of pride among the 17 goals. But no, we missed the bus again. Because nobody was interested in even giving up an inch of its sovereignty, the concept of sovereignty. And that's why when the refugee crisis, struck Europe, that they got up and started a new initiative called GCM, Global Compact for Migration, and another one called Global Compact for Refugees. And that's when I think the whole issue of diaspora got a completely different color. But then came COVID-19 and everything halted. So it was signed in Morocco on 18th of December 2018, but it could not be launched for the next 2 years. And that's when we found that the IMRF took place, International Migration Review Forum, last year, 2022 May, to review the progress of the Global Compact for Migration. And that's where I noticed, I could not go physically, but I did participate remotely because that was possible during COVID. And I noticed, I felt the absence of Indian leadership in that. India, being the largest source country, largest origin country, should have called the shots in steering the entire course of the GCM and the IMRF. But India was almost like absent, sitting at the backbench and raising hands only when other people were proposing things. And naturally, you'd find that things will not go the way the global south would want them to go, because India is a global south country, and India has the potential to be the leader of the global south country. And that's where I think today is the right moment at this Pravasi Bharatiya Divas to sit up and review and see that India whether through G20 or the UN Security Council, or independently take the leadership of being the origin country of the world's diaspora. And how can India contribute? Certainly all the details that we heard from Ambassador Saeed, from other speakers here today, of course, they have to be maximized, but at the same time, we need to understand that what is differently India can do. And that's where I think, in the context of the COVID-19 and the future that is likely to be there, I was just jokingly saying that the masks are coming back, COVID alert is back again, and that's where India can play a big role. I think what we are obsessed with about diaspora is diaspora for homeland development. I think we have done enough about that. It is time to move beyond that and think of third country development. Diaspora for third country development, I call it TCD. And that is possible because I have seen Indian doctors, Indian nurses going to Africa, sir, you have mentioned about Africa, and spending 3 months, 5 months and so on, grassroots level development, fighting infectious diseases and so on, all alone, not accompanied by families or friends. And that, I think, is a lesson that we can learn from. We can create such a force. We have UN peacekeeping force. I have also written that we should also think about UN health keeping force. And I think that's where the hint lies, what we can broach at the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas that is coming up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Vinod Kadria. You have traced out the history of diaspora and migration and the global engagement on migration issues. Just to also mention that at the global level, India has been a very active participant in several international platforms, starting from the Colombo process in 2003 to Abu Dhabi Dialogue in 2008, and of course the Global Forum on Migration Development, GCM. Most recently, I participated in the first Global Diaspora Summit in Ireland in April 2022, and the Minister of State, Shri V. Muralidharan, participated in the International Migration Review Forum. But you're correct that there are many other areas in which India, being one of the largest diaspora countries, can play a very, very proactive role. Of course, we do have the India-EU Common Agenda on Migration. We need to strengthen these partnerships globally, with entities such as IOM, ILO, and many other things. So your suggestions are very, very well taken. Now, coming to the very last speaker of this afternoon, this is to give the industry perspective. We have heard from government perspective, the former diplomats, and also the academicians. But here I would like to invite Mr. Sushil Pandit, who is the working president of the PIO Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Maybe I would request him to focus on how the diaspora can play a role in propelling growth, both in India as well as their countries, and to bring together the industries of the two countries together in terms of trade, investments, technology transfer, and in general giving a little dynamism to the industry, particularly in the post-COVID scenario. Over to you, Mr. Sushil.
Thank you, Chair Dr. Saeed, and Namaskar, Director General Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, my fellow panelists, and esteemed audience. It's a great honor to be here and sharing my views on the issue. A lot has already been said, but with respect to economy, as the Chair has guided me, I would start from the 90s itself, when our economy was not in a very enviable state. In the very early 90s, we had to pledge our gold to get our foreign exchange reserves in shape. And towards the end, in 98, when we tested our nuclear devices, we were slapped with sanctions. Our foreign exchange reserve was barely 24 billion at that time. And these sanctions were crippling. Why we celebrate PBD today has its roots in that event. In May, when we tested and the sanctions were slapped, by July, our government, then headed by Atal Bihari Vajpayee, announced Resurgent India bonds. We were trying to mop up about $2 billion US because we had less than 2 years worth of reserves in order to pay for our imports. We had a huge trade deficit. But would you believe, when this economy was not in a great shape, when Moody's and other agencies had downgraded our ratings, when we were slapped with sanctions, and the government was a rickety coalition of about 24 parties, it was the diaspora that responded with almost twice as much as was needed. About little less than $4 billion, more than 64,000 applications. That woke us up to what Indian diaspora across the world could do for us. And then the committees were formed, and then the reports came, and then the 2003 PBD happened. But it all was triggered in '98 by a tremendous success of Resurgent India bonds. But more than the money that came, dawned the realization that we have an untapped potential sitting out there. It isn't that this potential hadn't shown itself before. In the very early 80s, when most of us on this panel were at the very beginning of our careers, and when universities and schools hadn't even started using the word computer, nobody had heard this phrase called information technology. Absolute private citizens' initiative led to small computer teaching shops in the neighborhoods. They started offering diplomas to those who had just graduated or just come out of schools. And today, if we are reaping the benefit of an IT revolution, and this is nothing short of a revolution, I must share with you, I alternate between Delhi and London. Even small IT firms, and I know of one of them from Scandinavia that operates in London, which has only 8 IT professionals. 6 of them are Indians. Other 2, one is Sri Lankan and the 8th is Nepalese, and both have studied in India. And that is the total IT force of a Scandinavian company operating in London. I'm afraid if tomorrow the word diversity were to be applied there, it is not to get the people of color or ethnicity, it is to get non-Indians into IT. That is the level of domination, and no thanks to the government. No thanks to the universities, no thanks to the school curriculum. So when we talk of economy, if only the system, the bureaucracy, the legacy steps out of the way, that's what Indians can achieve. When our steel making was essentially a PSU enterprise, an Indian entrepreneur stepped out and became the biggest steel maker of the world, with not a single plant in India. That's Lakshmi Mittal for you. Now, what has changed in the last so many years? I had actually a small note prepared, but I don't think we have the time for it. The phrase wealth creation has replaced the phrase filthy lucre. You know, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and quite supported by our films and popular discourse, it's filthy lucre that guilt-tripped the prosperous Indians and romanticized poverty. We have moved far away from that. Today, the word nationalism resonates far better than nationalization, something that every private enterprise worker and employee aspired to, adopted by the government and take a job for granted. About 15 years back, we had a government where ministers used to lament that India has missed the manufacturing bus actually to China, and we must concentrate on providing services because that's what we are good at. Forget manufacturing. Today, we are indigenizing a lot of manufacturing here and cutting down on imports. That has changed. Incidentally, the number of mobile phones we are exporting runs into billions of dollars now. And we'll be growing 50% every year in the next 5 years in terms of value exports. Our exports used to be commodified natural resources like iron ore and cotton. They are increasingly becoming value-added manufactured goods. That's what has changed. We are opting out of trade pacts which are not conducive to our industry and manufacturing. Earlier, we used to be queuing up for being included in this pact or that pact, irrespective of what impact it had on our economy. That has changed. And all this apart, I don't think for years we've heard of scams anymore. Because policy used to be hostage to whims, patronage and pelf a few years back, and now it is technology enabled and transparent. So anybody can come and become a manufacturer if they qualify a certain criteria laid down for everyone. This represents an opportunity. We at PIOCCI, People of Indian Origin Chamber of Commerce and Industry, feel, and that's the approach here, that prosperous and successful Indians will make a prosperous and successful India. We are concentrating on people of Indian origin abroad, and entrepreneurs in India who can collaborate with them. We believe even if they collaborate with one another in different continents, people of Indian origin in South Africa collaborating with people of Indian origin in Southeast Asia, in East Africa with Europe, in North America with West Asia, and become force multipliers for each other, offer market access to each other, offer expertise, experience, capital, technology, collaboration. That's what will propel them to higher levels of prosperity, higher levels of scale, higher speed in terms of growth. And if they become more powerful, more prosperous, more stable, chances are they'll be able to connect with Indian economy with far more strength. And of course, get them to connect with Indian economy that represents a lot of momentum and lots of opportunity today. We look at 5 trillion economy as a great goal to achieve. It sounds very good. But what sounds even better is that for the first time, we have a government that has given us an evocative target. I don't think ever our collective consciousness was mobilized towards an economic target to be achieved in India. That is what makes a huge sense. But what is sobering to me is that our share of global GDP is still barely 3.26%, while our share of population is more than 17%. It tells us we have a long way to go. There's no room for resting on our existing laurels. We have huge reforms to look forward to within the country, and a great spur needed to build connectivity within the diaspora. That's where we need governments to step in. That's where we need our missions to step in. But beyond that, if you leave it to diaspora and step out of the way, there's a great deal to be achieved. Thank you so much for this opportunity, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sushil Pandit. You have given a very good industry perspective to the event. And certainly, you know, what you mentioned that we have a long way to go in terms of economic development, and but then there is a Vision 2047, which everyone is aware of. And just to cite a few of the things that as part of the vision, particularly relating to commerce and industry, which you talked about, is the talk that making India a global manufacturing hub, increasing the share of India in the world manufacturing from the current level of 3% to 12%, increasing the share in global trade from 3% to 10%, being in top 3 in the services trade, becoming an integral part of global value chains, and so on and so forth. So I think this is where we look forward to greater partnership with Diaspora, and also we look forward to partnerships with entities like PIO Chambers of Commerce. We are really running late, I think almost by 12 minutes, but still I think with permission of the DG, maybe we could just have 2-3 minutes of question answers, or 5 minutes. So if you have, anyone has question, very pertinent question, just please be brief and then ask the question. And then yes, please. Yes, please introduce yourself and say the question.
I am Tanuj and I am student of University of Delhi.
Okay, please.
So sir, as Ambassador Virender mentioned that diaspora is like our sons and daughters. And in society, there is ruckus today that India do not have migratory security policy, strong security policy, but the Western countries do have. And sir, there is also, when there was COVID and there was questions upon the kafala system from Gulf countries. And as a result, a lot of our diaspora is suffering in jails. So with these policy loophole, how do you deal with the security issue of our migrants?
Okay, thank you very much for asking this question. Maybe I'll take this. One is that you know, we during the course of our conversations we talked about the migration and mobility partnership agreements with various countries. But then you specifically asked about Gulf with all the GCC countries and some other countries like Jordan and other ECR countries. We do have manpower agreements. We also have domestic workers agreement. Then with European countries, we also have social security agreements, you know, with almost 20 countries. So these are the mechanisms which are which safeguard, you know, the interest of the Indian workforce abroad. Having said that, and having served widely in the Middle Eastern countries, I would like to mention to you that most of the Gulf countries themselves have now come up with new labor laws, which are very, very transparent, which takes care of the both the, of course, the interest of the workforce, as well as bringing about transparency into the thing. The kafala system, as you talk about, I think it is more or less the thing of the past. There is no kafala system as such in many countries. For example, in Saudi Arabia, you could change the sponsorship, you know, online. There is no need of permission even from your company to travel and all that. So things are getting improved. One of the things which we are trying to do is that you know, we have an e-migrate system. So we are integrating this e-migrate system with 13 POE offices within India. Another important thing what we are trying to do is that link up this e-migrate platform with countries, you know, countries, manpower, major manpower importing countries such as you know, the GCC countries and others. We have started discussions, you know, with Saudi Arabia, with UAE and Qatar. So I think with these measures, I think there will be you know, more transparency brought into the recruitment. As a country, we only believe in legal form of migration, so that people should go in a legal manner, so that if they go through legal manner, then, you know, there are chances that both the you know, India as a you know, sending country as well as the recipient countries, both will be in a better position to manage, you know, this kind of migration well. Yes, please. Anyone else? Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, first of all, I'm Avishkar from the International Labour Organization.
Yeah.
Distinguished panel members, a lot of discussion on the 4 Cs. I just wanted to highlight on the 3 S's that was mentioned by our Honorable State Minister at the IMRF actually last year in 2022. And the 3 S's were on safe, secure, and skilled migration. Again, it's a strong focus that the government of India has taken on this issue. Of course, as you mentioned, sir, also about how India wishes to be the skills capital of the world, and we're looking at skilled migration. How can you really ensure that, you know, making that migration process safe and secure? I think as UN agencies, we obviously work with the government of India. We have the tools, the guidance, the mechanisms that we can really make this process of labor mobility really safe and secure. And as Dr. Kadaria said, I think India can take that leadership in really showcasing how we can really protect our migrants before leaving the country. Just a reflection, sir, not a question.
Thank you. I think we are already working very closely with your organization and similar organizations, and will continue to do so. As I emphasize that as a country, we only focus on a safe and secure and legal way of migration. There was someone here. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I'm Dr. Stuti Banerjee. I'm a senior fellow here at the Council. My question is related to Latin America and the Caribbean. It was rightly pointed out by Ambassador Gupta that the Caribbean has a huge diaspora which is in a position of power, not just politically, but also economically. And in Latin America, largely, we have a diaspora, not in huge numbers, but they're very engaged in the business communities there. So I wanted to know, how do we engage with this diaspora? Because it does not really come into popular imagination. The American diaspora does, the one that is in Europe does, and the one in West Asia does. So how do we connect to the Latin America and the Caribbean diaspora, and as Mr. Pandit said, make them as force multipliers for our engagement with them? Thank you.
Would you like to take? Okay. Yeah. One thing, I mean, your Ambassador Virendra Gupta was correct that, of course, we should not make a distinction between diaspora and diaspora. There has been, in the past, people used to look, okay, there are certain privileged diaspora, there is somebody else not so privileged. That's what was alluded to. But I must tell you that if you simply look at the list of the, Pravasi Saman awardees this year, out of the 27, you will see that our idea is just one award for one country, so that there are no, disproportionate, representation from this. So basically, you see out of 27, 26 are one award to one country. Now, if you look at the two chief guests, in this thing, one the president of Guyana, another the president of Suriname. Now, and also a huge business delegation which is coming along with these two, both for PBD as well as this. This goes on to say that the focus has always been there. There are special programs which were made for these countries, and of course, the distance sometimes makes it difficult for a more frequent engagement than what we would perhaps like to in a regular sense of the thing. But nevertheless, distance has not kind of kept us away from engaging with diaspora in the Latin American and Caribbean countries. We have very strong ties individually with each of these countries, and we really appreciate the contribution which the diaspora is being done. Our thought process now is to kind of have some sort of alumni where we engage with the the key people based on the geography, based on the field of specialization. And I think once we start thinking in these ways, I think it will be in a more focused manner that we will be able to engage with particularly the diaspora in the Caribbean countries, which are a very, very important element of our overall diaspora, because some of these diaspora, they, as I said in the beginning, they go for several generations, not just a recent one, but going back to several generations.
Can I add?
Yes, please. Ambassador Gupta, please.
You see, in the Caribbean, there are three countries, Guyana, Trinidad, and Suriname. These are amongst 5 countries in the world where the Indian diaspora constitutes roughly 50% of the country's population. So as you can well imagine, those countries are very, very special for us. And it takes courage to articulate that point of view, because theoretically, the diaspora members are foreigners, and therefore there should not be any special dispensation, that we should treat all countries alike. But that hasn't happened, and that, I think, says a lot about how the Government of India's policies towards the diaspora have completely transformed. Now, if you look at the level of engagement that Government of India maintains in terms of high-level visits, in terms of the size of our diplomatic missions, in terms of location of cultural centers, and so many other factors, you will find that there is a considerable engagement with those countries. Now, insofar as other Latin American countries, except for some of the countries where we have a lot of government-level engagement, I think this point I must mention, that in the last 10-15 years, our diplomatic missions, wherever they are, there was a time when I joined the diplomatic service in '77, I was told by my ambassador that there were certain priorities for me. Diaspora was at the bottom of my priority. In fact, no priority at all. And from that, we have come a complete turnaround. Today, most of the missions attach the highest priority in terms of engaging the diaspora. So I think that fills the void. There are countries where there may be very small number of diaspora, but even those small diaspora will be on the horizon of our missions, our heads of missions and other officers. So I think that enables more active engagement.
One last question, please. I think so. Okay. Okay. Sorry that we couldn't take more because I think we are running short of time. But we can take one last question, and then some of the things can be over a cup of tea. We can maybe discuss. Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Saad. I had the opportunity to hear you several times, and having been a practitioner of migration at the policy level as well as operational, spanning 4 regions: Africa, Middle East, South Asia, I feel that India can, and I have no doubts of the progress India has made. One has witnessed it sitting in international meetings, sitting in regional meetings like the Colombo process and the Abu Dhabi dialogue. But what I feel is really much needed now, and this takes us to the whole issue of having a comprehensive migration policy. This has been talked about in several meetings, and I think that's where India should also really look at it more seriously. And the other aspect is that India is a country which has the highest amount of internal migrants. And this also, when we talk of sustainable development goals, and migration is very much there, what I feel, having been a practitioner all these years, that we've got to build a continuum. We've got to look at internal as well as international migration. There are lots of linkages there. So, comprehensive policy is what we're looking for.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, all of you, for participation. So I'll pass on to Ms. Surabhi.
Excellencies, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Indian Council of World Affairs, I express our gratitude to Dr. Asaf Saeed, Secretary CPV NOIA, for finding time from his busy schedule to not only give the special address, but also chairing today's panel discussion. We are also thankful to all the distinguished panelists who have helped drive such enriching conversation today. We also express our sincere gratitude to members of the audience for their interesting observations and comments. Thank you. May I now request all of you to join us for tea in the foyer.